leadership is responsive and flexible, individualizable, if you like. So I don't have to lead like you, but we can both lead highly effectively. People think that leadership is so rigid that you decide how you're going to lead and other people just have to deal with it. We've all met those leaders. I'm a yeller, I'm direct, I'm this, and they think that's an effective way. And I'm not warm and fuzzy. Ask any of my team. I am incredibly robust and deeply demanding. But I do recognize that I've got some colleagues who need a certain approach and others who need a different. There's all of these myths around leadership. They're really unhelpful. One of the other ones is the idea that leadership for many people is in and of itself a behavior. I'm a good leader, and they think that's a behavior. And they don't realize that it's actually broken down into lots and lots of tiny little things that make a difference.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, where we dive into smart thinking for today's leaders so you can navigate change, build stronger teams, and reclaim your energy. And remember, for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. For this episode, we're diving into the world of leadership with someone who has extraordinary perspective on what makes great leaders stand out. Our guest is John Amaechi. He's an organizational psychologist, a former professional basketball player, and author of the new book titled It's Not Magic: The Ordinary Skills of Exceptional Leaders. John dismantles the myth that great leadership is reserved for the charismatic or the elite. Instead, he argues that exceptional leadership is built on ordinary skills, deliberately practiced, consistently applied, and deeply human. From self-awareness to empathy, from clarity to courage, John offers a refreshingly honest framework for what it means to lead well. John is joining our podcast from London, where he heads APS Intelligence, a group that helps organizations create high-performing, ethical workplace cultures. John Amaechi, welcome to Leadership.
Thank you, Roger. It's a pleasure to be here.
John, tell us what inspired you to write It's Not Magic.
It was a frustration with some of the leaders that I work with who seem to, and I'm fairly sure you've had this experience before, they see you do something that they find challenging, and the way to avoid engaging with having to learn some new skills is to say, well, of course you can do it. You've got some kind of innate special skill. You were born with, an ability to de-escalate conflict, as if that's possible. And I was seeing so many of these excuses with people that I had to research it because it really appealed to me. The idea that I was somehow kind of magic appealed to me. And I knew because it appealed to me, it was wrong. And so I had some of my colleagues at the University of Exeter do a research study following me around for several months, everything I did. And I expected them to come back to me with a report that said 97% of what I do is coaching skills, basic leadership stuff, but 3% is some indescribable magic ingredient. And instead, my colleagues from the University of Exeter came back and said, yeah, it's an interesting combination of very ordinary skills. It was a little disappointing, but I think an excellent lesson for every leader who says they can't do something.
Well, tell us more about what you mean by ordinary skills of exceptional leaders. What do you mean by that? Give us some examples.
So it's foundational things like the idea that we know. I used to work in healthcare, for example, at one of the largest hospitals in the United Kingdom, in fact, the largest hospital in the United Kingdom. And we saw that outcomes in surgical environments were altered by whether the patient thought that the surgeon cared. So their outcomes were improved if they thought the surgeon cared, regardless. And this was whether the surgeon was the most skilled or quite skilled or somewhat skilled. whether they thought that surgeon cared was important. The presence of that person, the authenticity of the interactions, the fact that the interactions weren't just transactional made a difference. The same is true with managers and their people. Managers who are transactional, managers who seem to manage to be in a space with their people, but somehow absent from that space. Those managers who, when you're virtually with them, you can see that what they're actually doing is writing an important email while you're talking to them. So presence is one of those things that makes a massive difference. Leaders who are able to listen and create environments where listening is the norm. And although that sounds incredibly mundane, that is not the norm. We talk at each other. In the book, I talk about this idea that we are in an environment now where we're not willing to listen to people, and we think that the way we talk shouldn't be curated for other people. It should just be said in whatever way happens, and if you get wounded by it, that's because you're weak or stupid. And so managers have a responsibility. And again, these are just really simple skills that make a difference.
Well, as you well know, a lot of people think listening is just waiting for your turn to talk.
100%. It's incredibly damaging too. Everybody knows this. Human beings are highly attuned in social interactions. And although we ignore them sometimes because we feel there's too much peril, the person in front of us has too much power for us to say anything, it does alter how we operate, how well we operate. And if you know that when you're talking to somebody, you're seen to be of so little value that what you say couldn't possibly impact what they'll say next, it means that there's no point in you talking anymore. And what you add will be increasingly less valuable over time. So it's not even about being nice to people. And I want people to be clear here. This isn't about, oh, shouldn't we be all nice to each other? This is about how do you win? How do you create an environment where people are willing to share their ideas, willing to consider what they say so that the environment can be most effective?
Well, you're talking about what Amy Edmondson calls psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And that's critical in any relationship. I'm still fascinated by what you said about the research at the hospital, that a surgeon's demeanor had a positive effect on the physical well-being of the patient. That's fascinating to me.
It is, isn't it? Healing time, for example. And so even as I said that, some people will think, oh, that's nice for the patient. But actually, if you're trying to run a hospital where you need that bed for the next person to come in to efficiently run the place, whether you're in a system like the NHS, and especially in America, if you're in a system that is private healthcare, you want that bed back as quickly as possible. And short of kicking somebody out with an open wound, the only way you do that is to ensure that the healing happens as quickly as possible. And the relationship you have with your surgeon and their surgical team and the nurses is a predictive factor for how fast you heal. So there's an actual commercial benefit to creating a relationship.
Well, if that holds true, and I know it does, because I have some great physicians, if that holds true for physical health, it absolutely must hold true for psychological and social health.
Absolutely does. Yeah. There's tons of research. This is not mine, but there's tons of research out there, and some of it I talk about in the book. But this idea of we know that your manager is, I think, who was this? This was Gallup. Your manager is, in like 2017, I think it was, your manager is 70% of the variance in the experience of their direct reports. 70% of their experience is the relationship with the behavior of the manager. But more than that, we know that managers have more impact on the happiness of a person, of an employee, in and outside of work than their partner. We know that managers have more of an impact on the mental health of an employee than their family doctor or their counselor. Sure. It's pretty remarkable, the duty of care that should come with that.
And the health that you have at work, you take home with you.
Of course you do. And it's a contagion, isn't it? Because we all know what it's like, as much as we love our loved ones, when they come back almost, it's not just burdened with, but it's like there is a stench attached to them from the negative things that have happened in their day that then permeates the entire space.
Right. Well, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. I mean, that may sound like a cliche, but I believe it's true.
It's certainly true.
Share with us, if you would, John, a story from your time in the National Basketball Association that exemplifies leadership in action. What did you see there?
So there's tons of them. The one, I think it's in theme with the book because this is incredibly mundane. So I think lots of people have exciting stories from the NBA, and I have lots of mundane, but I think important stories in the NBA. My first year, I was in Cleveland, and I was there with this amazing rookie. I was not. Anybody who looks up my career, I was incredibly average, and that's being generous. But I remember driving in to the arena, Gund Arena, as it was called then, in my Jeep Grand Cherokee, and being followed in by one of my teammates who was one of the draft picks, one of the superstars, brand new, and followed in by this old head, this veteran player, Michael Cage. And we all drove in together, and I was looking at my young colleague's new car when Michael Cage walked over to us. It was a lovely brand new car, his second brand new car in about 2 weeks. And Michael Cage walked over and he said, Is this his new car? This is your second new car in 2 weeks. He said, Give me the keys. Give me the keys. And, there's veterans have some power in the NBA that is just implicit in their status. And so he gave him his keys. And I watched as he got into that car, got Bobby into that car, drove them back to the dealership and made the dealership take that car back. He came back to the locker room and he was sharing with all the rookies. He's like, look, I know you've got money. Some of you have got a lot of money, pointing at Bobby, this other guy. And some of you don't have that much money, but it's more than you've seen, pointing at me. He said, you've got to understand, you've got taxes to pay. You've got other obligations. You've got people who are going to come out the woodwork. You need to be more careful. And I was like, this is what it is to lead. It's not even on the court, but here is this person protecting me. That's what it is to lead.
Well, helping them establish a mindset and some habits that will serve them all the way into retirement.
See, that's it. And what an excellent what an excellent summary of what leadership is instilling habits that will last you all the way through to retirement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, John, how does your training in organizational psychology influence your approach to leadership?
I think I've had a really lumpy, interesting journey. And so I'm a nerd and a scientist. And what I found is that my background in sport gives me good stories to illustrate dull science. And I've found that my training, even that, as unusual as it is, because I started off as a marriage and family therapist. And so what I found is I can look at organizations and whilst I look at them with all the rigor of a proper scientist with an organizational background, I also have this family dynamics and this transactional analysis view of it, looking at, board members as grandparents and execs as parents and minus ones and twos as children. You can see a whole new dynamic. So I'm very fortunate that my experience is really varied. It's cross-cultural. I've lived in America. I've lived in mainland Europe. I've lived in the United Kingdom. And it's given me this overarching view, I think, that's quite helpful, especially now that the problems are novel. There's less of the same old problems and more of new problems, some of them generated by technology, some of them by regulatory realignment, some of them by socio-political upheaval. And I feel more prepared because of what I've seen and because I'm a reflective learner. So I incorporate the things that I learn in interesting ways.
Sure. So what do you see as some of the most common misconceptions that people have about leadership?
Well, they think that you're born a leader or you're not a leader.
Right. You either have it or you don't.
Yep. They think leadership is about volume and aggression. So essentially a proxy for masculinity of old, rather than understanding that leadership is responsive and flexible, individualizable, if you like. So I don't have to lead like you, but we can both lead highly effectively. People think that leadership is so rigid that you decide how you're going to lead and other people just have to deal with it. We've all met those leaders. I'm a yeller. I'm direct. I'm this. And they think that's an effective way. And I'm not warm and fuzzy. Ask any of my team. I am incredibly robust and deeply demanding. But I do recognize that I've got some colleagues who need a certain approach and others who need a different. There's all of these myths around leadership. They're really unhelpful. One of the other ones is the idea that leadership for many people is in and of itself a behavior. I'm a good leader, and they think that's a behavior. And they don't realize that it's actually broken down into lots and lots of tiny little things that make a difference. I was talking with a leader the other day who said, I want to become more approachable. And when you talk about what things it takes to become approachable, it's a massive list of tiny behaviors. It's the way you hold your face when someone approaches you. It's whether you decide when you're sat at your desk doing busy work and someone approaches you, whether you decide to turn your body to them and look at them, or whether you decide to do this. Literally, right. I've told leaders this before. Literally, if somebody talks to you here and all you can do is this, you're literally telling them while sitting on a swivel chair that they're not worth the effort of swiveling. And then we're surprised. We're surprised when they respond poorly.
Well, what you're saying reminds me of a family friend. He was a classmate of my brother at the U.S. Naval Academy years ago. And, of course, when you're a plebe at the Naval Academy, a freshman, it would be called at other schools, you take a lot of abuse. I mean, that's part of the tradition to toughen you up. And this fellow's name was Chuck Krulak. And he, like every other plebe, took the abuse, but he noticed that some of the upperclassmen had a different approach. Rather than yell at people and demean them and insult them and try to break them, they would say, here's what I want you to do, here's why I'm asking you to do it, and here's how to do it, and you'll get the best result. You can choose to do it that way or choose to do it another way, but here's the result that we want, and here's how to do it. He decided then that that's the kind of leader he wanted to be. Now, Chuck is small in stature, and he's soft-spoken, but Chuck became Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. So somewhere along the line, that quieter approach worked with Marines. So what you're saying is, I believe, so true, so insightful, and so ignored by so many people who, as you say, somehow think that noise is the way to be a good leader.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the approach that you're describing there from somebody who becomes the commandant is how energy expensive it is.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you contrast the two approaches that you talked about, I just yell when I'm angry. I say what I want without telling people why or giving them a purpose. It's easy, and so it's appealing to us and appealing to many leaders because it's easy. The other side that you describe, the self-regulation when a junior person in our midst does something that is wrong and feels to us as experienced old heads as very stupid. And the way we have to go, I am not going to just yell and lose my mind. That right there is both appreciated by the followers, because it isn't just the person you yell at that's watching, it's everybody else who's watching to see what is standard here. And frightened, this is the thing I don't understand about workplaces now. Frightened people don't perform. Anxious people don't perform. Uncertain people don't perform as well as those who aren't. And I just want to win. And if that means a little self-regulation, a little deep breathing, a little pause before I respond with a little too much heat, it's worth it.
Right.
It's worth it.
Now, we haven't used the term yet, but we're really kind of talking about emotional intelligence. So let me ask, how do you teach emotional intelligence to people who are coming up through the leadership ranks?
So firstly, I would say this. I call it, and lots of psychologists I think now do call it emotional literacy, simply because we have this idea about intelligence that you're born with it. Again, you're either smart or you're not smart.
That's true.
And that's the first excuse, especially for men who say, well, I'm just not very emotionally intelligent. The excuse is I'm a man, so I'm not, or I'm a certain age, so I'm not, or I grew up in a certain environment, so I'm not. And I want people to understand it's literacy. It is a choice to learn and learnable. And then you think about how you learn it. And what I tend to do, especially if I'm working with older, very senior leaders, is to say, because they often have children, they often have young people who are in their orbit. And I say to them, the young people who are family related to you, think about how you interact with them. For their birthday, do you just pat them on the shoulder and say, yes, nicely done, when your niece is in that terrible play where every child is singing and it's a cacophony? When they finish, do you say, that was awful? Your voice wasn't good. Why were you not? No, you don't. You understand the moment and you understand their relative progress and you understand the impact of what you say now on whether they ever sing again. And if you can do it in that context, then you can do it in others. It's just a choice. And it's energy expensive because my high standards mean that there are times when I just feel incredulous that things aren't done as well as I would hope. But I know that how I respond to that has an impact that isn't just today. I'm a giant. You can't tell because I'm in this tiny screen.
I assume that you are.
Yeah, but I'm 6'9". I am 300 odd pounds. When I yell, the room shakes.
Yeah.
When the room shakes, people operate like there's an earthquake, and nobody is doing their best work during an earthquake. And that's the thing I'm trying to convince. I want to show them that they can do it. I want to give them some very specific skills on how to do it, really specific, granular behaviors that they can do that will make a difference. And I want to show them how it will reward them in the longer term.
Well, as you say this, John, I can literally envision you coaching people on how to behave, because what you're saying, you're being very explicit in your description there. And I think that's part of what a good leader must do, to be explicit about expectations and explicit about modeling behaviors that you want and need and know produce good results.
That's exactly right. And again, this is all in service of what every leader wants, which is to win in their context. Whether they're a manufacturing company producing widgets, whether they are a professional services delivering services, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're a hospital delivering healthcare, you want outcomes of winning. You want to win. And that's what I want to do. This is a path to it. This is a path to it. It isn't fluff. It isn't nonsense. It isn't woke young people stuff. This is a path to sustainable success in a world that is increasingly reducing the performance, productivity, and connection of people to their companies.
Sure. So there's a lot of talk nowadays about vulnerability. What can leaders do to model vulnerability without losing authority or respect?
Yeah, this is one of those things that I think vulnerability as a word for leaders seems to frighten them because there's this thing that it just goes from 0 to 100. And so they're often at zero vulnerability. And they imagine when they're being asked to be vulnerable, it's 100%, which means they have to cry. They have to tell people I'm hopeless. I can't do anything. They have to reveal every anxiety and fear. And it's not it. Leaders are too powerful to do that. You cannot just share that your world is falling apart and you don't know what to do. That will devastate an organization. But what you can do is curate it. I sit with some of my psychology team, and I did statistics a very long time ago in university, and I did it with a pencil and paper. So surprise, surprise, I'm not that good at using the new software for doing statistics. But these guys are brilliant at it. It's second nature. And I just have to be honest. I can either pretend that I know what they're doing, or I can tell them, look, can you walk me through this? Because I don't understand how you're getting to this. But then you know what happens? My expertise shifts when we start to interpret. Because I'm the one who's been inside organizations across the world. I'm the one who's been around and talked to senior leaders. I'm the one who's tapped into what the market is doing to what's happening in organizations. And so my expertise can surface, and I don't have to be vulnerable there, but they have to be vulnerable to say, oh my God, there's so much I don't know. And I don't understand why leaders don't recognize that kind of wave of back and forth of vulnerable in this moment, less so in this moment, vulnerable again. That's the way that we forge a real relationship. There's an example I use in this book and the last book I wrote, where it's like, if you've ever seen the Blue Planet series, which I think is amazing, it's a David Attenborough natural history stuff. And invariably there's a shark, or you can see it during Shark Week. There's invariably this scene where there's a dark figure in the blue, and then you see it's a shark, and it's a great white shark with its mouth slightly agape, its teeth showing. Even though it's on the television, there's a vague sense of terror in us. And I think leaders think that's what leadership is. I'm slightly frightening, even when I'm not biting you. But that's not it, because that shark is invariably covered in other fish, remoras that stick onto it and add drag. And that's the problem with invulnerability, with never being vulnerable. You attract the wrong kind of follower. You attract the kind of follower that thinks their only job is to hold on for dear life. And then when you make a kill, they'll jump out, grab a mouthful, and then stick back on. I want a pod. I want a team. I want people who can contextually step forward when their expertise or experience demands it. I don't want people hanging onto my back. I'm too old for that.
Well, appropriate vulnerability builds trust. You got to trust your leader. And one way to build trust, one of many ways to build trust, is to let people know that you don't know everything. I mean, you talked about the people who are more comfortable with data than you. That's terrific. And you are more seasoned than they in interpreting the data and talking about, here's what we can do with what we've learned from what you've produced with your skill with data.
It's absolutely right. People trust computers and machines less than they trust human beings. People trust strangers less than they trust people that they know. So there's a vulnerability that's not just about our technical vulnerability. We need to also share a bit about who we are as leaders, because otherwise we become this distant machine that will never be something we can trust, because we don't trust a dishwasher. We use a dishwasher, but we don't, we're not invested in it. We're not trusting in it. And frankly, when it breaks, if it's old enough, we just throw it out. And that should be a cautionary tale to all senior leaders who are of an age where they might well be thrown out. Instead, you want to create a sense of connection with it. So when this thing is not quite functioning like it should, you want to do everything you can to support its return to action.
Well, that brings up a question.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
How do you best deal with an organization where there are multiple generations in the workforce?
So I have done a couple of papers on generations in the workforce, because most of what people think anecdotally is not real about generations in the workforce. It's really confusing to me that we imagine, and I can't think of the actual break-off dates at this point, but we imagine that someone born on the 31st of December 1967 is inherently different than somebody born on the 1st of January 1978. And it's like, that's not how it works. So the conventional thinking, when you look at the research now, is that there are a number of factors that do make a difference. And one of them is stages of life, as in the fact that we are less neuroplastic as we get older, and that what we learned at a certain era in our life, 20s, 30s, early 40s, tends to have more sticking power to us than what we learn in our 50s, 60s, 70s. It's not that we don't learn. It's just that there's a gravity around the stuff we learned when we were at our most intellectually peak. There's things like, so there's stages of life makes a difference. And then there's also the idea of episodic incidents. The idea of, we're still examining it right now, but the impact of the children who grew up through COVID.
Yes.
The impact of children who grow up through extreme poverty, the impact of children, there's almost an epigenetic formula for that. Then there's the impact of people who grow up through war, and not just wars that they're experiencing because bombs are dropping around them, but war that they're experiencing because they're witnessing it on television every day. I remember when I was in university in Vanderbilt, was that the first Gulf War was going on at that time? And it was everywhere. Every lunchtime when you went to the meal hall, there it was. And so those types of things, plus the stages of life, does mean there are some differences. But all Gen X aren't X. All Gen Ys aren't something else. All baby boomers aren't something else. And we need to be more sophisticated in our understanding of it. And in order to recognize the individual ways, because I get it too. I go into places where I'm the oldest person. There's some offices in software companies that I work in where I am very evidently the oldest person they'd ever seen in a working environment.
And that's gonna continue, John, because you're getting
really
older,
is.
like all of us.
It really is. and so there's something about it, even for me, where I was looking at them and I was starting to have this kind of, these people are all, and that right there is so reductive that I'll never be able to see the individuals. And if I don't see them, one thing is guaranteed, is they won't even try to see me. And so I've really taken a much more energy expensive, individual approach to people. And when I see commonalities, I'll try and connect people with them. But I won't assume that I know you because you live in a certain part of the world and you are a certain age. I would rather explore what that might mean. Because I don't imagine everybody, if we didn't have the sound on here, I'm not, and your leadership book poster wasn't in the background, I'm not sure that everybody would assume, if they looked at this with the sound off, that the conversation we were having was this conversation. I don't know. I don't quite know what it is that they would think, but I'm not sure they would think it's that. And I think that generational talk is not nuanced enough, and it blinds us to access to the brilliance of lots of individual people.
Well, one of the, what I would almost call a cliche phrase in our time is people want to be seen. Now, that's always been true, but we talk about it more and more now than I recall. Now, we hear a lot these days about so-called toxic work environments. Tell us, if you would, what specific ordinary leadership skills and behaviors can help transform a workplace from toxic to one that emphasizes trust over micromanagement, psychological safety over fear. What kind of specific behaviors can a leader mindfully exhibit and demonstrate that will help with that?
So these will all center around reduction of incongruence. I'm a humanistic psychologist. I trained in San Diego, and this sounds more pompous than it needs to, but reduction of incongruence. The idea of when you promise more than you deliver, when you say this is going to be your experience and this is something different that's going to be what's promised, there the problems lie. So for leaders, communicate more regularly than you imagine. Most leaders undercommunicate. That is verified fact. Most leaders undercommunicate. When you undercommunicate, you reduce 2 senses for your colleagues, your teammates, for the people that your direct reports. They think that you are less competent because you're not talking to them enough. They think the reason, Roger, the fact that you're not communicating to me on a weekly basis about what's going on is because you've no idea what's going on, because you're an idiot. And that's what they start to think. Perhaps a little kinder than that, but they start to question your competence. And they also start to question whether you care.
Right.
They start to think, this person's not telling, we're in this environment, we're in a transformation. Who isn't at this stage? We're in a transformation. We're in a cost of living crisis. We're in a regulatory change or whatever else. We're in a production cycle. And you're not communicating with me? You don't care about me. And what's interesting is that care and competence are 2 components of trust. When you look at the Edelman research, for example, they always talk about the sweet spot of trust, ethics, care, fairness, and high competence. That's where the trust is. So if you don't communicate well, then you're not going to have your team that trusts you. That's one thing I would do. The other thing is stop working with strangers. Stop imagining that knowing someone's job title is enough to be effective.
Right.
I am, and I don't know if you were a former McKinsey type person, but I am so annoyed every time I hear people talk about the war for talent. That 1997 document has done more damage to the workplace than they can possibly make up for ever, because there is no war for talent. There is a blindness to the unique abilities of people who could help you right now, today, because you look at them and either you haven't bothered to get to know them, so you're literally working with a virtual stranger. I worked with a company who they worked internationally, and they had this big challenge, and then they had this bloke show up from one of their suppliers Brazilian, spoke Portuguese. Guess what? Nobody speaks Portuguese. They thought they'd be able to get away with it. They couldn't get away with it. All of a sudden, they've got this other guy cleaning in the office. And somebody in the office is like, oh, yeah, I was talking to this bloke earlier. He's Portuguese. His partner's Portuguese. Nobody had a clue. No, it wasn't his job. But there he was, being connected to this thing and facilitating a supplier deal as a translator. Because there it is, the talent right there.
Right under their nose, yeah.
You've got it sweeping up your hallways instead of being in-house helping you with that. There's no war for talent.
Sure. All this reminds me of some of the roots of the word communication. One of the roots is about creating a commonness. And to me, that means you can't just talk at people. You have to communicate with them. And it's not just how you doing. It's got to be a little deeper than that.
For sure.
A lot of times we have great talent right under our noses and we don't realize it.
How frustrating is that? You know, I think it's partly because I played sport. This idea that I talk to a lot of men who are leaders, a lot of people, but it's men who have this particular notion of they love the marginal gains conversation. You know, how they could, you know, they talk about it in the form of the sports where they wore the shark skin suits and shaved off half a second. They took some weight off of a seat post and shaved off half a second. And the reason I think people love this is because it requires no personal effort. They think that there's a software system or a program or AI that'll solve it. And it's like, it's you.
Right.
You need to do something different. If people thought you were more approachable and you were able to exhibit those skills consistently, you would miss less. People would tell you more. If you got to know people in your office, if you got to understand the people around you, you would find the ways that they could help you that aren't written in their job specs. It's you. That's the marginal gain. And not that marginal.
Right, not so much. So whether they acknowledge it or not, John, most people have a bias or two or three or four. How can leaders identify and challenge bias in themselves?
So the key here is recognizing that we are all biased. Having bias does not make you evil, racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist.
Right.
But pretending that you don't likely will.
Right.
So here's an experiment that we've been doing for many, many years. I've got 30-odd thousand respondents around the world for this. And it is consistent wherever you go around the world. If I said these words, not to you, but to your listeners and viewers, weak, emotional, bossy, gossip, annoying. Weak, emotional, bossy, gossip, annoying. We know from asking 31,000 people around the world that those are the words that people associate with women. We, as reasonable men, know that that is wrong. We know that it's dangerous for women, and not just in the workplace. We know that when I give that list, by the time I say weak and emotional, about 70% of people, whether you're a man, woman, or non-binary or anything else, knows that that's a woman. That's the level, the visceral level that we have to understand our bias. We have to understand that if I say to you the word doctor, we have an idea in our head, despite the fact that there's a 50-50 split nearly in medicine between doctors who are surgeons, right? We know that that's a man. If I say lawyer, there's an image that pops into your head. If I say CEO, there's an age profile that fits into your head, as well as that's the bias we're talking about. And it's not about evil. It's just about assumptions and stereotypes. And as long as we're willing to say, oh, that's me, I think that sometimes. And as long as I know that I'm about to go into like something really useful for everybody who interviews, before you go into that interview, say to yourself, I am a human being. It doesn't make me a bad person, but I must recognize that I am carrying some assumptions into this job of IT specialist.
Right.
And I'm just going to think for a second, some of the things that I always kind of hold in my head are important for this role, and really consider whether they are important or not. And then I'm going to talk to this person.
So, John, what's the most common mistake that you've seen leaders make the very most common? You clearly have interacted with thousands, maybe tens of thousands. What's the most common mistake, and how can they avoid it, or how can they become more aware of it?
So the most common mistake is an internal mistake first. And it is the idea that I watch leaders and powerful people in organizations who always, in a moment of challenge, in a moment of real conviction, where choice is important, they will prioritize comfort, or at least the avoidance of discomfort, over organizational performance. They will know the thing that is better for the organization, and they will do the thing that is most comfortable for them. I just wrote about this today. A man who is a very senior person in an organization that I'm an in-house coach in. And I was in the office and I watched as he wandered in from the lift and he found the first people he could talk to and was like, oh, I've been to the gym and I'm so sore. And he was telling them all about how sore he was from the gym. He even said, if I'm not sore the next day after the gym, I know I've not been working hard enough. I proceeded to watch this man who had sought out pain the day before. I proceeded to watch him avoid 2 feedback conversations. One was for him, and I watched him dip out and escape. And one was a conversation I had a conversation with him that he must have to one of his direct reports and chose not to have it. I watched him walk around the corner as 2 of his team were not quite fighting physically, but certainly arguing really loudly. I watched him walk around the corner and disappear back. He knew that those were all the wrong decisions. He wants to win, he says, but he chose personal comfort over organizational performance. It is the number one thing that I see in leaders. There's a ton of other things, but that right there, I think you can almost explain almost everything that doesn't work. Why your new CRM system is not adopted in time, why your merger has not been, the bringing together of 2 organizations has not worked properly. Personal comfort from very senior people, from leaders, over organizational performance, and they know it.
Well, it's ironic that this man seemed to be bragging about bringing pain and discomfort upon himself by going to the gym, and yet he avoided, apparently, the discomfort of having a conversation with some people that needed to be had.
That's exactly it. It's so frustrating.
Incredible irony there.
It really is. And I even addressed it with them. I was like, so, that DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, that's a sign that you're doing stuff right, that you're working well. So why don't you recognize the discomfort of giving that feedback or even hearing that feedback? It is the same pain that is a sign of growth, not breakdown.
Somehow that's hard for a lot of people to understand. We've heard that feedback is the breakfast of champions. We've heard that forever. Whether that's true or not, I think there is a lot of truth in it, but a lot of people seem to avoid the breakfast of champions.
Which is crazy. We know what happens when you avoid breakfast. Not good.
Well, sure. And not only people are not going to improve if they don't get good coaching, call it feedback, call it whatever you want, but it needs to be straight talk. And if you exude an aura of authority that causes people to be reluctant to give you feedback, you're not going to grow. There's apparently a lot of that going around.
There is a lot. Oh, yeah, there is a lot. But even as you were saying that, I was like, so many leaders love to talk about the parallels to sport, but they appear to take all the wrong lessons from it. I remember being in practices, and again, full disclosure, I was a very average NBA player. Still makes me better than most, but I was very average. And I remember this where one of our 3rd or 4th coach, not our head coach, just our 3rd or 4th, was watching me shoot, and I was in my flow. This was in my days in Orlando. I was playing really well. And he came over to me, and I remember he just said, that much. It was like 5 millimeters. It was a tiny amount he was telling me to adjust. And some part of me flushed with kind of reject. Yeah. And I was like, but this man is here to help me. He wants to help me win. He wants to help us win. And that's what coaching is. That's what leadership is. Constant minor adjustments that everybody is sure are not just about my personal preference, but about our organizational success.
Right. The best leaders I've been around are very good at accepting feedback and are very good about interacting with people who have difference of opinion. In fact, I recall one leader, I've mentioned this on other episodes, Gordon McGovern, CEO at Campbell Soup Company when I worked there years and years ago. If somebody disagreed with him, he would say, "Terrific, you see it differently. Help me understand where I'm missing something." And he wasn't playing gotcha. He wasn't playing a game. He wasn't setting them up. He really wanted to know what was their perspective. And when people understood that he had that orientation and it was genuine and it was very different from the previous CEO, it's amazing how good ideas just kind of started to come out of the woodwork because people felt safe in disagreeing with the boss.
Yeah. I mean, what a wonderful example, though, of exactly what we've been talking about, the very basic skills, because we can talk about psychological safety, and I do think it's really important, but with it, there's really complicated models about how to generate it. And you just said the magic words, his words, right? Help me understand. When said genuinely, not with sarcasm and not with kind of menace, but when said genuinely, help me understand is one of those words that opens the space of the room. People are like, oh my God. And again, it's not just the person that they're talking to. Everybody else is thinking, oh my goodness. Yeah. This powerful person is really willing to hear me. And it does two things, by the way. Yes, they'll tell you the stuff that they hear. More people will approach you with new ideas. But when that happens, more people will curate what they say. They'll be like, if this person is willing to hear what I have to say, I am going to make sure that what I say is really considered, thoughtful, evidence-based. So you actually get better ideas coming forward because it's psychologically safe. Why would anybody not want this?
For sure. Well, John, what is one question that all leaders should ask themselves every day?
How self-aware am I? How self-aware am I? Is the way I see myself really how others see me? There's really good evidence from a wonderful woman. She is Professor, she does brilliant work on self-awareness. It'll come to me in a second. She does brilliant work on self-awareness. And she talks about the fact that the more senior you are, the less good at knowing how well you know yourself you are. We get less good feedback. It's tighter usually. And so how well do you know yourself really? I've seen lots of men who think that they are seen as candid and direct and thoughtful and honest. And instead they're seen as callous and cruel and thoughtless and careless. And that makes a difference, right? Because one of those people is somebody you'd like to work for, because in this world of confusion, we want people who are transparent and fair and open and direct and tell the truth. But we don't want people in this environment who are cruel and callous and careless with their words. So do you really know yourself accurately to how others see you?
And asking yourself that question requires considerable honesty with yourself.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, John Amaechi, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. John reminds us that leadership is not magic, it's a choice. It's a series of ordinary decisions made with extraordinary intention. The most powerful leaders are not the loudest or the most charismatic. They're the ones who show up. They listen deeply and they act with purpose. If you're waiting for a lightning bolt to strike before you lead, you may be waiting forever. But if you're willing to practice ordinary skills like empathy, clarity, and accountability, you're already on the path. The future doesn't need more magicians, it needs more leaders, and that can start with you. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to make better use of their time and attention. And be sure to leave a review. Even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that Leadership offers. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.